All right, welcome back to Resilient Voices and Beyond. I'm so excited to have the guest that I have on today. But before I get started, just another thank you to all you guys that are listening, all you guys that are supporting, and just following the work that I'm doing. I appreciate all the encouraging words, all the support and what have you. I definitely could not be here without you guys. And just a shout out to all the people I've recorded with. I appreciate you guys being guests, on here. Definitely could not, have kept this thing running without the conversations and the thought provoking topics that we were able to bring up here. So thank you to all of you. For some of you guys, maybe a first time coming across this, you may not know who I am and for detail or what have you. But my name is Mike. My name is Michael D. Davis Thomas, aka MDDT Speaks. It is my initials. I've been doing this for a little bit, almost a year now. Almost a year. It's coming up on a year. Released 51 episodes in season one. If you haven't listened to that, go check that out. And a 3-episode miniseries collab with NFYI, National Foster Youth Institute. And I'm on season 2 now, and this episode will make it episode 18. So that's a little bit about this work and what have you. I spent 11 years in the Michigan foster child welfare system, 5 being on the juvenile side, 6 being on the foster care side. I've done a little bit over 10 years of work in the child welfare arena, doing policy, programming, social work, working in corrections in the juvenile facilities, working as a youth care worker in several different congregate care facilities, sitting on 15 different boards, currently working 10 different jobs surrounding child welfare. And I'm currently a part-time student in school trying to obtain 2 doctorates and a master's. So that's a little bit about me. So now you know me, um, I can ramble on. So I'm just going to pass it to my guest to introduce himself.
Hello, I'm April Barcus. I use they, them pronouns. I spent about 6 years in the Los Angeles County child welfare system. And I am currently attending Rutgers University in Newark to get my bachelor's in political science and in the process of applying for a dual law degree, Ph.D. So I want to go into civil rights law and work on disability rights. So thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here and I'm looking forward to it.
Awesome. I appreciate you being here, April. I know I've been following some of your work for a while now and just seeing some of the powerful things you've been able to advocate about and get it to huge audiences, so I'm excited to dive deep into getting to know you and part of how this started. This podcast is setting the stage for people to see the people behind the work, to be able to understand their stories in a certain depth that isn't displayed when we're just advocating, So my first initial question for you is, when did it all begin for you and how did it start?
Yeah, so I entered care when I was about 12 years old. I actually didn't enter through DCFS. I entered, which is Los Angeles's child welfare. I actually entered through the mental health department because of my situation at home. My mom got them to pay for it. And then I went home around 13 and then officially entered care. But because I was in a group home setting for that year, I count that as my entry into the world of child welfare and the start of my placements. I was in, I think, 7th grade when I entered. So I was pretty young, just starting adolescence.
Awesome. So, I typically ask this question going navigating around, but since mental health was the very beginning, it was kind of like the beginning of your entry into this realm. What if you don't mind me asking, what was your mental understanding of everything prior to going into care, and how did that waver and change throughout time?
Yeah, so I was misdiagnosed with bipolar disorder when I was younger. I was told when I was 7 years old that I was bipolar, but I wasn't officially diagnosed till I was 12. Um, and as I got older, it became clear that it was PTSD and anxiety more so than bipolar disorder. But I was caught up in that system where kids who are quote unquote acting out are seen as mentally ill. And I thought there was something wrong with me for a really long time because of that system. I was on medication. I was being told that I was, you know, broken basically. And I remember when I first entered the group home, and this always stands out to me, like I was so excited to enter the group home because I didn't fully grasp what it meant. And it just meant like I had access to all these activities and like I was in a place where things were going to get better. Um, so that kind of speaks to how lonely and like where my mental health was when I entered care. Because group homes should not be exciting.
Yeah. Wow. I think back, and I even thinking back to like the work that I do now and everything, understanding mental health a little bit more better and more in depth. Because much like yourself, I was misdiagnosed, and scapegoated through that diagnosis as an excuse for other people to act how they were acting, you know. um, so I've come to find that things like RAD, reactive attachment disorder, PTSD or institutionalization as often causes, but our misdiagnosis is ADHD or bipolar disorder, and all these other things. So you're overly medicated or put on the wrong medication, when it could be simply one of those three things, with I think simply by looking at the behaviors as language and really listening, and understanding. So I appreciate you sharing that. My next question is kind of just traveling down that timeline. You said at 13 you initially entered into care, so where did you go, and walk me from 13 to 18.
Yeah, so after I went home after the first group home I was in, I was there for about a year and a half. I stayed there for a couple months, and then I officially entered foster care. Um, Honestly, it was a really jumbled experience. I was in about 33 foster homes over 4 years. My first placement was an emergency 30-day placement, followed by a foster home that was actually abusive. So I stayed there for a year and then they ended up losing their license. Um, and then I just kind of moved around from there. I was probably moving every month or two to a different place. And because Los Angeles County is so massive, um, I was moving like hours driving away from where I was at the time. So I went to 22 different high schools. 3 of those were freshman and sophomore year, and the rest were junior and senior. So it was very, very traumatic, very lonely. I remember being the perpetual new kid, and eventually just stopped trying to make friends because it just didn't seem worth it because I was going to move again. And so my high school experience was really all over the place and extremely lonely. Um, and when you move placements, you're getting a whole new family. So like it's as someone who is very introverted, meeting new people is always hard. And so it felt like I was constantly in that state of like having to adjust and like meet new people like for 6 years.
Wow. I want to make sure I heard this correctly. 33 different placements
Yeah,
and
I'm
22.
estimating. I don't even have an exact number because they didn't
And
actually track it well enough
that's an
for.
estimate.
Mhm.
That's an estimate in 22 different high schools.
Yeah, that one's definitely accurate.
Now, I graduated at my 21st high school. I couldn't imagine doing one more. I couldn't.
Anything over 2 is a lot, though.
And I know you've been in this field, advocating and doing some work. So you know the stats just as well as I do, with every new placement, every new, school, it sets that person back, So how did that affect you in a life sense with the movement, with social, relationships, with building a sense of community or just having a sense of normalcy to be able to grow and develop?
Yeah, I don't think I really had normalcy, like at all. Um, in terms of how it affected me in terms of social skills, I was it's ironic now because I'm very friendly and talkative now, but I was very quiet. I didn't really interact with people at all. When I did, it was usually because I was fighting for the same, like a chance, right? Like against my
Mhm.
social worker, or whoever the foster parent was, like, hey, I need this. Um, and I remember like I aged out at 18. I qualified for extended foster care, but because it was brand new in California at the time, I was told that I didn't qualify. So I actually didn't take advantage of foster care, extended foster care. And so I remember I dropped out of high school when I aged out because I was more focused on surviving. And then a year later, I was able to go back to a continuation school and finish all the credits that I had missed. I was a freshman in credits
Mm.
when I started at that continuation school, and I was able to finish about 140 credits in 4 months.
Can I ask,
Mhm.
what age did you go to the continuation school
I
and
was 19
at
when
19?
I started back at high school. They had a enrollment cap at the age of 20, so I was right there.
Yeah. Wow. Wow.
Yeah, I was lucky enough to get my actual high school diploma instead of having to go through a GED route, which is valid. Like it's still valid, but I was very
Mhm.
grateful that I was given the chance to get my high school diploma.
Definitely, definitely. And I did another episode with a young lady named Catherine Dwyer. She works with foster youth in our Department of Education for the state of Michigan, talking about credits and, how due to multiple different placements, multiple different schools, credits not transferring, credits not being full, or, all these different things. And just to imagine, you know, your story, and the multitude of barriers, I want to ask you that moment, going through the process to go back to the school. Did you already know that you were that far behind, or was that notified to you that you were that far behind?
I figured I was pretty far behind. I don't think I thought I was a freshman in credits.
Yeah.
I thought maybe like sophomore year. Luckily, California had a law where we could graduate with less credits if you've been to 5 or more school districts, which I definitely met the criteria for. And so I was able to graduate with less credits. The problem with that, though, is it's not A through G requirements to get into a 4-year. And at the time, it was kind of hard to figure out which schools would take you without A through G because of that law and which wouldn't. And so it completely took 4-year, going straight to a 4-year off the table for me. But it was jarring, especially since like I have been a nerd my whole life. I have been lucky enough to just really naturally do well in school, and so I was straight A's, honor roll, in honors classes in middle school. And then when I entered care, all of that kind of stopped. Because I was focused on survival, I wasn't able to excel in the classes that I wanted to.
Mm. Wow. Oh, before we even go any further, that's a lot to have dealt with, to have processed, and so forth. But I want to take a step back
Mhm.
to some of the placements, um, to whatever comfortability you willing to share. What was your experience in these placements, and was it conducive to more trauma, or you know, what was it like, and why were you placed so much?
Yeah, so I mean, all of them, I don't think I really had one good foster home. Some of them were manageable, but they weren't necessarily healthy. Also, I was in and out of foster homes and group homes because in Los Angeles County and many other states, I'm sure this is common, they label you high risk for a number of different reasons. And the problem with that system of labeling someone high risk is one, they get more money to take care of you. And so there's an incentive to label you high risk. But also high risk at least in Los Angeles County can mean anything from the situation you were taken from with your, biological family, when you were placed in care, or it could be you have addiction, um, you know, um, issues, or you have gang affiliation, like, or you're a runaway, or like, I mean, the list is like super long and it's a super wide range of things that they label you high risk for. And when they call a foster parent and they say, hey, do you want to take this kid? They don't specify why you're high risk. And so I was labeled high risk because I had really severe PTSD and night terrors. And I was also a runaway risk. It wasn't necessarily that I was like hard to deal with. It just those things made it a little bit more difficult to take care of me. But they don't specify that when they call a foster home. So what would happen a lot of the time is they would call and they wouldn't take me. And because placements were already limited, I ended up in group homes solely because that was the only bed available. And so like I've done a lot of advocacy work around that because it just feels so broken, because you're setting kids up for failure for something that usually they don't have any control over. And if you would specify why that person is high risk, you might be opening some doors for that person and not putting them into institutional settings, as we know are really, really unhealthy. Think of Us just did their report on congregate care settings and how terrible they can be.
Yeah, definitely. um I would be interested to know if, I believe my state does have some kind of labeling. I don't know if it's like low risk, high risk, particularly those words, but I do believe it's some kind of leveling system to determine if someone needs to be in congregate care or what have you. But we know across the board nationally that that has been completely thrown out the window because we don't have foster homes, so our alternative is, oh, let's throw them in congregate care. But congregate care doesn't have the funds to actually run sufficiently and provide a nurturing setting. So it becomes more so as children prisons. That's what I call them. That's what I think they are. Um, you know, and it is more conducive to bringing on more trauma, especially not having proper staff that are trained in trauma informed actions, or being just trauma informed and working with youth. So it's a lot. That's a topic for a whole nother conversation, but
And
yes.
they're businesses, right?
Right.
So they have an incentive to cut costs, and
The
usually that's at
industry.
the expense of the care of the child and their care.
Definitely, it's an industry. Child welfare is an industry, and that sickens me to say that and to think of it like that. But that's what it is. You know, People are getting paid. People are getting rich off individuals' trauma.
Mhm.
When it's the darkest moment, in people's life, someone is getting $1 million for having this. you know, but you know,
You're
hopefully
preaching
y'all
to
don't
the
get too
choir.
mad at me. You know, hopefully you don't get too mad at me, but just saying it how it is, somebody get the check cut up, you bet your quota, but yeah, wow. So transitioning into adulthood, um, what did that look like for you? What barriers did you face from 18 to, let's say, 20?
Yeah, so my first place that I lived when I aged out of care was I was sleeping on a like crib-sized mattress on the floor in a house that eventually got condemned because it was free. And I didn't have, a high school diploma yet. I didn't have a job. I didn't even qualify to get a job in most places without the high school diploma. And I also didn't have healthcare. My healthcare was like caught up in like it was delayed switching over to Medicaid cover till 26 program. And so it was really unhealthy. And then from there, I just kind of hopped around renting rooms from people I knew or um, people that I like knew through other people. Um, I didn't have stable housing until I reached 23 years old. So, and because I was told I didn't qualify for extended foster care, I was completely on my own. I wasn't getting any assistance from the county or the state at all. I didn't even know I qualified for all these different programs until I started my advocacy work, which was around 20, actually.
Okay, okay. Um, if you don't mind me asking, you can completely be like, no, I'm not comfortable with this question, but um, how did, as you were enduring all of that, how did managing social life, relationships with people, what did that look like for you as a person figuring out self and life?
Yeah, I think I was willing to put up with some really unhealthy relationships because those relationships were the reasons I had housing or I had access to transportation that I wouldn't otherwise have, right? And so most of my early 20s was putting up with people that now I would never allow in my life um,
Mhm.
because it was the only way I wasn't going to be homeless. Um, and so looking back, like I do really wish that my social worker had been more informed on extended foster care because I always find myself wondering, like, would I have been in all of those unhealthy and sometimes abusive situations if I had had those resources that I was supposed to have, right? Like it wasn't that I didn't qualify, it was that my social worker had told me that I would be in a group home if I went into extended care, which now as an advocate, I know is nonsense.
Yeah. Wow. I asked that question because, a lot of us, due to trauma and many other reasons, coming out of the system, friendships, let alone intimate partnerships and relationships, can be a juggle, because in part of when we get to the aspect to have those adult relationships, that's when we start to face the brunt of our trauma because now we have to adult and deal with mental health, deal with self-care. But also, I got this booski over here, I'm trying to, love and live life with, and it's a lot, and a lot of us find ourselves in toxic, unhealthy, abusive, sometimes a sex trafficking situation, or promiscuity or what have you. Yeah, it's a lot. So I was really interested to hearing, what did that look like for yourself? Now, going back forward, you know, advocacy. When did this begin for yourself and how?
Yeah, so when I graduated high school, I immediately enrolled in the community college that was near me. Antelope Valley College, um, which at the time had the largest foster care population of any college in the state, which was kind of a big deal because if people aren't familiar with the Antelope Valley, like we have a lot of foster youth. And so the dean of student life at the time was someone had started the club, our Guardian Scholars Club, which was our support program, and they were in the process of starting a program like officially through student life. And that person happened to be graduating, and so I was asked to be the president. It was barely off the ground at the time, still in like recruitment and building stage. And I said yes, and that kind of started the advocacy work. I started working with the local independent living program. I started trying to get other former foster youth to get involved on campus because we had almost 1,000 foster youth that had, at least the people who had checked the box, right, that they had experienced. And so really like thinking like, how can we create a community for people who've also experienced this? And how can we make sure that these young people are getting connected to resources? Because historically, Los Angeles County is pretty difficult to navigate those resources because it's so overcrowded and under-resourced. I mean, we get a lot of money, but when you look at how you break that down per foster youth or per former foster youth, you're talking like, just it's so difficult to get access to those resources. And so if you look at like just the money, yeah, we look over-resourced, but when you look at how many people are competing for that resource, you'll see like the same disparities you see everywhere.
Definitely. And it's crazy, because California is, a state that most states look at as a best practice, but I've talked to many people coming out of the state of California, and Los Angeles County and a couple other counties there, that I probably cannot pronounce. You know, they talk about when you get to the nitty gritty, like we still got food deserts. Unless you, how this and that and the third, you still facing, a lot of disparities, a lot of gaps as far as trying to find funding. Plus, there's this whole situation of you can be technically foster care eligible in other states, but they have this whole thing where you're put on like probation kind of something, so it's weird, and then you have some juveniles that probably should be in foster care, but they're on the juvenile side of things, so it's a lot from what I've heard, and I'm outside looking in, so I don't know the complete story or the roundabout about it, but it's very intriguing to hear your perspective on the disparities and the gaps, between funding, because from other perspectives, coming outside, we like you was trying to get like California, and I'm like, well, do y'all really know?
I think the one thing that makes California the state that everyone looks towards, right? Because there are definitely things that California has started in child welfare, advocacy, and places they do well, right? But I think the thing that really sets California apart is we have a massive youth advocacy board, right? California Youth Connection, who I ended up getting connected to through my advocacy at the community college, is a statewide org. We have hundreds of members. It's been around for over 30 years. And it's been responsible for a lot of the legislation that we've been able to pass to make improvements that becomes model legislation for the rest of the country, right? So we do have a lot of youth that are fighting for change. We do have and like as young as 14, up until 25, I believe. So like we do have resources that other states don't necessarily have, or if they do have it, it's not as robust. And so there is that California does well. And I think that was really the switch from the community college to CYC, was really the jump that kind of catapulted my work, because I all of a sudden had access to the state capitol. I had access to writing state legislation. I had access to being in rooms with the people who had the power to make decisions. Um, and that was extremely important. It felt for the first time that I was able to kind of take back my story and use it for good. And I fell in love with it.
Wow. So, I have two questions shoot at me at once, so I'll try to, yeah. But wow, like it's really interesting. Every time I talk to someone from another state and I know a little bit of information, I'm always like, huh, what you don't know or what you don't see. But also, like, I think that's one of the biggest things that, I've taken from and putting and building initiatives in my home state is California Youth Connections, because I see how powerful it is, to be able to build, a building block or a brigade that anytime there's legislation that comes in that talks about or is about or surrounding, foster youth or child welfare, that there's this huge, group of people, there's essentially a huge advisory board, that has a say. And I think that's one of the biggest things that when I think about best practices and how to make your state better in the aspect of child welfare, I think about that, and it's not even just in terms of foster care. I think about that in terms of politics, like having a forefront for, any policy. Like you don't just go and act it as an individual person, like having a board of constituents or people that you can go to that solidifies like, yeah, this will actually be helpful for us. Instead of like, oh yeah, we're gonna establish this, we're gonna see how this plays out, and then if it don't work, we're gonna try to push another policy to throw that one out the window or make this one better. Like that doesn't help anybody, but I think that's one of the biggest things when I think about pushing for advisory boards in the state of Michigan and trying to have more lived experience at the forefront. That's something that I looked at, the work of CYC and NFYI, and even more so now, think of us and some of the work they've done over there.
Yeah, like lived experience is so important, when especially like using child welfare as as an example, where it's not just child welfare, as you said, right? Um, but we have conversations with social workers and policy creators and legislators who are like, this is what's best for youth, but we have a completely different perspective living through it. And some policies that have been passed that had good intentions and were meant to help improve foster care might have actually been harmful. And so that lived experience gives us the perspective to say, hey, like you might think this is working, but we want to change this because this isn't working for us. This is actually hurting. And so I think every single type of social change, any type of social justice work, like you need the people in the room who experience being the, marginalized or oppressed, because if you don't experience it, you're not truly going to understand what it's like, and what needs to change, because an outside perspective is completely different from an inside perspective.
Definitely. So, I have a couple questions that's going to intertwine with each other, but you started advocating, getting out there, and then you even connected with CYC, and that took it a whole nother level into advocacy. In this process of your adult life into this advocacy, how did you manage or take care of self-care? Like, or I have to ask an honest question. Did self-care drop a ball a little bit, because you were helping other people and you were fighting for something, because I know this is a trend with advocates, when we get our voice out there, we start advocating, we fall back on ourselves, and that healing journey kind of, sometimes it falls all the way back, or sometimes it just stays stagnant and takes a pause until we pick it back up. So I'm interested to hear, what did that look like for yourself?
Yeah, I full disclosure, totally dropped the ball with self-care for a long time actually. Um, I am pretty known for being a little bit of a workaholic, um, and not being the best at taking breaks, like many advocates, right?
Mm,
And so there was a couple years there where I got really burned out. And it was actually around that time that I discovered I had a disability. And so like I was working a job with a 2-hour one-way commute and a job that just drained me. Um, and it was in social work. And I remember that job, I stayed with that job for 6 months. And when that job ended, I was so burnt out that I actually was like bedridden for several weeks, because I have an autoimmune condition and amongst other things, that I didn't know I had. And um, I had to take a really deep look at what I was doing and kind of decide like what should I prioritize right now. And it took me many years, and I still struggle with it, but it took me many years to realize like breaks are good. They are productive. You're not being lazy by taking a break. And then also like in terms of the advocacy opportunities that I accept now, when I was younger, it was like any opportunity was automatically yes, um,
mhm,
which is very unhealthy. And also like a lot of it that we do is not paid, or if it is paid, it's a very small stipend. And
mhm,
so I was burning the candle at both ends. I was working like 20 hours a week on advocacy work that wasn't necessarily bringing in income. So I had to supplement it with hourly work, right? And so I ended up burning myself into the ground. Um, and when I moved to New Jersey for school, it was very clear very quickly how bad my physical health had gotten. I have a rare connective tissue disorder called Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which affects the way my body creates collagen. So anything with connective tissue in my body just does not function right. Which, for those who don't know, anatomy is literally everything. And so over time, I like my body was forcing me to take a break. And so now I'm really, really passionate about when I'm talking to younger advocates who are just starting out, encouraging them, like, be mindful of the opportunities you take. Ask yourself, what is this adding to your life? What is this adding to your experience? Is it worth it? Because the amount of things I said yes to that looking back, I'm like, oh, they were totally tokenizing me, or they were using me in my story. And like I did a couple panels where they completely switched what we were saying to like be about what they wanted, right? Um,
right.
or things like that. So, and take paid positions. Don't take free positions.
Definitely,
Your
definitely.
experience is important. They can't do this work without us. They should be compensating you for
And on that note, on that note, because we are living this atmosphere of transformative change, healthy, healthy advocacy. That's what I'm calling it. Healthy advocacy. And what that looks like is self-care and taking things, that doesn't make you share your story from a weak place. You should always share your story from a place of strength, and that's just been part of strategic sharing, and also part of being in a healed space to share it. I think starting out like in our day, it was the only way to advocate. You had to take what you got and what have you. But it's a new day and age where child welfare is shifting, and we have power to shift that narrative of compensation, for the because honestly, some people don't want to look at it like this. I get it, all right, power to you. But for people like myself, this is something that I've taken on as a business. My story brings me income. And it's not that I'm taking a story in a whole different right from what I've been through or what have you, but it's just something that helps me continue to bring transformative change, and it brings me equity in return. So I can't afford, and I hope all that are listening can understand this in the perspective of other youth and stuff like that. No one can afford to do anything free nowadays, especially an adult, that is advocating or taking time out of their day. It takes, and this is something that is naturally known. You can look into it, but it takes 2 or more minimum wage jobs to sustain yourself. So to think about someone that is making less than 20 hours because they're trying to advocate for your organization and they only getting paid half, if not, minimum wage for that particular hour or so that they've done an event or what have you. How is that going to help them sustain living?
Exactly, right? Like that time we spend on the advocacy, like a lot of us do it because we love it. But that's time we might not necessarily be spending on a job that's an hourly wage that can help us survive. And that's why you see this constant issue with burnout with advocates, because a lot of it is free. And so, someone who might be working 30 hours a week to like make money is also putting that like 10, 20 hours a week for advocacy, right? And then a lot of us are also in school. So we're looking at like 80-hour weeks. Like most of the foster youth I know who do advocacy, we work nonstop. We don't, it's not healthy. And so if we can shift this narrative to our advocacy is our career, and our advocacy is valuable, so we should be paid for it. And if we push these orgs and these government agencies to really understand that our expertise is important, and our expertise they literally need to create this change, we can hopefully shift it to where no one is doing free advocacy. No one is telling their story for free. And also, like, our story is to talk about our story can be traumatic, especially when you're learning how to strategic share. It takes time. I think all of us have stories where we shared a little bit more than we probably were comfortable and didn't realize it till after. And so understanding like the emotional toll that comes with telling your story sometimes, or being in these spaces and advocating for change and being told no, like that happens. And that's hard, especially when you have that lived experience, when you're like, hey, this is harmful. And then they're like, no, never mind, we're not going to do this. Or it doesn't pass through whatever voting process it's going through. And so there is a lot of emotional labor in this work. And so thinking like, how can we make it healthy and compensate the people who are doing this work? Like, I would love to see a world where everyone gets paid over minimum wage hourly for advocacy.
Definitely, definitely. Um, yeah, yeah. Because I can talk about this for hours. I can go in depth. I'm gonna get into my next question. So there was a major shift in your advocacy. From general getting out there and the good fight. You know, um, to advocating around disabilities. And I can only think that had something to do with personal experience, but if you don't mind sharing, what was that shift and why?
Yeah, so when I moved to Jersey from Los Angeles, my healthcare had just stopped because I had turned 26, and so there was like this weird in between where healthcare was kind of spotty, and so I stopped getting treatment that I was getting in California and realized, wow, okay, I'm really sick. And I had been trying to get a diagnosis since I was 15. Um, and when I finally got the diagnosis, I was really angry because now that I know what it is, I look back and I'm like, oh my gosh, these symptoms were here when I was in care and I was telling people, hey, I'm in pain. hey, this isn't right. Like, I'm super tired and I don't know why. Like, I would sleep 14 hours and still wake up exhausted. And I couldn't, like, I physically can't wake up sometimes. Like it's almost like I'm a zombie. Or like I would be having other like symptoms, like migraines are a big one. And I talk about this in my report that I did for the Congressional Coalition on Adoption Institute foster youth internship that I did this summer. Um, I had staff members coming into my room when I had really severe migraines. I get stroke-like symptoms from my migraines, so my face will droop, my speech will slur. It's honestly pretty scary, but they're very severe. And I would have staff members coming in the room, banging keys on the door, turning on the light, taking my blanket because they thought I just wanted to sleep and just didn't want to go to school. And so when I got my diagnosis, I realized kind of where that gap had been while I was in care. And I realized that if we had better education for people working in care, for foster parents on what chronic illness looks like, on what like disability looks like, and how to address that and make sure that young person is getting access to care, especially with placement changes, right? Like if you're moving placements, you might need to move specialists. So how can we create a more consistent healthcare access with those placement changes? Because what happened a lot of the times when I was in care was I was going to a doctor, I was getting evaluated, and then I would move and I would have to start all over again. And when you go to a specialist, if you're in care, documents don't always get ported over, right, correctly. And so what was happening is I was starting all the basic tests over and over again. I spent 5 years of my life doing the same basic tests with specialists over and over and over again. Instead of at the point where the basic tests didn't come back with anything, I should have moved on to different testing, right? And so how can we make sure that young people aren't falling through the cracks, especially when we know that trauma and a high ACE score or adverse childhood experience score makes you like shows that you have a higher risk for autoimmune diseases, heart conditions, chronic illnesses. I mean, like a whole plethora of health issues, right? That can become disabilities. How are we not addressing that? It was shocking to me that there was this big gap. And while we acknowledge trauma makes you at high risk for that kind of thing, there was really no policy or training to really show care, like child welfare workers and caregivers, how to address it. And so because of my personal experience, because of living with a disability, I kind of use that frustration and anger to fuel that advocacy. And my hope is that eventually we'll get to a place where I won't be one of very few screaming into the void about this, and that we can actually make some change, and that we can actually address it. Because I'm in a foster care support program that's still in California, and it's specific to one city, and almost 1/3 of the people in that program have an autoimmune or chronic illness, which is astoundingly high, right? And so if we look at how many foster youth have disabilities, we're going to see a huge number, especially when we look at the definition of disability as it was intended to be, right? So I think a lot of times when we talk about disability, we think of physical illness, but the definition includes any physical or mental condition that severely impacts your ability to function on a daily basis, right? PTSD, depression, anxiety, those can be disabilities. And so my guess is that probably way more than half of us have a disability, but there's no policy to really address that. We're just kind of being like, good luck, goodbye. And then we throw kids into adulthood in that transition, and they don't have access to good mental health supports. They don't have access to healthcare the way they should. And then they're getting worse and worse and worse instead of getting the assistance that they need.
Definitely. And I want to thank you for bringing that up because it sparked something in my mind, on a possible reason why we're not seeing, because I'm a firm believer none of this stuff is new to the people high up. It can't be like it's too easy to find the conclusion to the answer. To like, okay, yeah, this is something that is happening. It's too easy to see. Okay, boom, boom, boom. This is okay. Go ahead and put that in that file over there. We ain't gonna talk about that because and I feel like a lot of it comes down to funding. A lot of it comes down to the fact that if we acknowledge that, and don't quote me on this stat, but I'm just thinking over 85% of people who come into care have a disability, whether that disability is going to be lifelong, or it is manageable and can be treated, if cured or what have you, what does that mean? Because then we get into the whole aspect of we already have to pay higher per diems to people, congregate care, group homes, when we place somebody who has a mental health diagnosis or disability, but if we publicly acknowledge that people coming into care, more majority of all of them, because all of us have suffered some trauma, has PTSD, maybe have some attachments disorders, or so much, or so forth, because I can't speak today. That mean that we're going to have to acknowledge that we're going to have to pay people. But my challenge to that is the fact that why can't we help people without the money having to be involved?
I
You
think
know,
it's I think it's definitely we need to train people better, right? Because I think a
Mhm.
lot of it is like social workers and caregivers don't know what to look for. I didn't know what to look for, and I was the one experiencing it, right? Um,
Mhm.
but also like our federal tracking of disability in foster care through the AFCAR system was woefully inadequate. It recently changed this year, and I'm very excited about that. Um, but up until the change that happened recently, they still used terms in AFCARs for disability tracking, like, and sorry, these are slurs. They used mental retardation.
Mhm.
They still had Asperger's on the tracking system, which for those who don't know is something that was formerly a diagnosis that was formerly used to differentiate autism, what they considered severe and not severe, and dates back to World War II, and who they decided to kill during the Holocaust. It hasn't been in the DSM-5 for many years, but it was still on our AFCAR system. They also, for anything that was considered a mental health disability, they used the term emotional disturbance. And so these changes have been made, but just thinking about, like my condition wasn't on that tracking list. A lot of conditions weren't on that tracking list. And so when we were tracking who had a disability and who didn't, we weren't really gathering all of the data that we needed to determine that. And it was also like, it's usually tracked when you enter. And so what about all the people like myself who were experiencing a chronic illness or a disability and did not receive a diagnosis until we aged out of care? Those people, are they getting on that tracking system, right? Because that's only while you're in care. And so if we have a more wide viewpoint of and vantage point of who is disabled in care, and if we truly look at the definition of disability and we make sure our tracking system is broad enough to encompass everything that would be considered a disability, what would the numbers be, right? Like my estimate is close to 90%. But we don't have the numbers. We don't know how many people are disabled. And so the changes to the APCAR system will hopefully increase the amount of people who are being, seen and not left beside, without care. But also our healthcare system, again, placement changes. How are you going to get access to healthcare, especially with specialists, when you aren't staying in the same place? Also, like, is your foster parent going to really do the work to make sure your appointments are happening, make sure you're getting to your appointments? I'm sure we've all had experiences where it was difficult because our foster parents are supposed to do that. They don't necessarily do that. So how can we ensure that we're making, like, these young people are being seen and they're being believed? The gaslighting I experienced in care was astounding to me. Like, and I am a white person. Like, they are more likely to believe me. And so, like, the thing that I'm constantly, like, going through my head is, like, it's so much worse for youth of color in the system. It's so much worse. And, like, the stuff I experienced was terrible, but it's not anywhere near as bad as someone of color might experience. And so, first and foremost, when someone says they're in pain, when someone says they want medical attention, get them medical attention, because most foster youth are really hesitant to ask for help because of the mistrust in the system. So if they're coming to you and they're saying that they're not feeling well or something's wrong, listen to them, believe them. Don't assume it's attention seeking or whatever mental health excuse you want to come up with. Believe them, right?
Yeah. Oh, so many things just rushed into my mind. I wouldn't consider myself an expert or major advocate when it comes to mental health or disabilities. But, these are some topics that I've spoken on of my own lived experience, and so forth. So it's really intriguing for me to listen and to hear the vast knowledge that you have and the passion behind it, because it's much needed. But a big thing that, as you were talking, came to my realization is that as human beings, as human beings, 99%, if not 100% of us have a disability, because we all suffer trauma in our lifetime. And we all, if we look at how trauma affects individuals, we all, whether it be temporary or whether it be a couple months, whether it be a year, or whichever, from that distinct aspect of trauma, and by the definition, of it.
I think it's also like, you don't know what's going to happen in your life, right? Like, you could get in a car accident and go from able-bodied to disabled, or, age. As we age, a lot of us become disabled, right? And so a lot of the times when I'm doing disability advocacy, it's trying to get people to understand that this is not like, you're not born disabled and then that's it. Like, you're not just, you can't possibly be disabled after that, right? And so when we're doing this advocacy work, a lot of it is trying to get people who don't currently have a disability to realize that this disability policy affects everyone. Because a lot of disability policy is also like access to affordable housing, access to healthcare, access to safe and reliable transit. Like, all these things will help every single person. They won't just help disabled people. And lately there's been an uptick in, unfortunately with the pandemic, there's been an uptick in ableist language around disabled people, because only disabled people are dying from COVID, right? But that's not necessarily true. There's plenty of healthy people who are dying from COVID. And there's plenty of people now who are now disabled because they got COVID. We're seeing some pretty alarming numbers of people who are developing long-term disabilities after getting COVID, even ones who were asymptomatic. And so how do we look at policy in a way that, yes, we're helping disabled people, but understanding that, like most policy, there's usually some unintended impacts for people who aren't part of the community that we're directly trying to address policy changes for. And so how can we make sure that every human in the world, but in our country, has access to the things that they need to survive? And that might be a very radical standpoint, but I truly believe that like healthcare and housing and all of these things are necessary for survival, and it shouldn't be hard to fight for it. And we shouldn't have to sit here and say so and so deserves to live.
Boy.
And so like really understanding that like disability can happen to any of us. It happens to a lot of us. Right now, the current number is about 25% of Americans have a disability. But like you said, it's probably a lot more than that, because how many people have a disability that aren't getting disability benefits, who aren't getting, a diagnosis, who are in the process of getting that, right? A lot of our
Definitely.
disability numbers are people who are getting disability services through the government. And let me tell you, I know so many disabled people, myself included, who refuse to do that because it's forced poverty. Foster parents in a lot of states actually get paid more than disability payments would be for a disabled person. And we're supposed to cover housing. We're supposed to cover all of our, unless you're lucky enough to get on a Section 8 wait list that isn't 6 years long. And then you're also supposed to cover like expenses. And a disabled person is on average going to spend about $500 a month extra out of pocket on disability related costs. We're also more likely to be unemployed or underemployed. So when you look at, we don't even have marriage equality, because if you're on disability benefits and you marry someone who is not also on disability benefits, the assumption is that that spouse is now going to take care of you financially, and you risk losing your benefits. You can't run for public office without risking losing your benefits, even if it's an unpaid public office. And so looking at how we help disabled people in this country, not just foster youth, but in general, like how can we make it more equitable? Because those changes will help non-disabled people. They will help able-bodied people.
I think, and this is going to be a weird segue, but it came into my mind. Morgan Freeman was once asked, how do we stop racism? And he said, instead of my black friend, or Morgan Freeman is black, I'm Morgan Freeman. I'm Michael, and so forth. And I think of that in the aspect of, like I was saying, prior, all of us have endured something that can technically label us as someone who has a disability or had a disability. And if we look at that from the perspective of holistic, that we all are perfect, we can bring the human aspect into things. I think about our social services from our health, from our education, and there's so much humanity that simply as having humanity and thinking from a humane standpoint will help make that radical transition in policy in the legislation. Why has it taken so many years
I
for
think
simple wording to be changed?
Mhm. I think a lot of it is that when we talk about equity work, right? A lot of the times we focus on equality versus equity. So yes, we are all humans. We all deserve to be treated well. And like, while like me as a disabled person, I want to be treated like everyone else, right? But I think it's also important to, while embracing the difference, acknowledge the difference, right? Like
Mhm.
when we talk about equity work, it's like, where is everyone starting? Because the reality is someone who is in a position of privilege is going to start way higher in terms of like, if you look at like level systems, right? They're starting on level 10 when people who don't have that privilege are starting on level 0, right? And so embracing the difference and learning to just be okay with people being different, but also acknowledging the disadvantages that come along with some of those differences, right? Because like the reality is disabled people do not start on the same page as an able-bodied person. People of color don't start on the same page as a white person, right? Like privileges and intersectionality is real, and understanding that like while we should embrace differences, we don't all start on the same page. We don't all start with the same privileges and resources, and how we need to address that. We need to make sure that the people who have less resources are given the resources they need. The people who have more privilege are also given resources they need, but that they're going to be very different resources, right? And so when
Mhm.
we look at radical social change, looking at it from a lens of equity versus equality, because the reality is if we give everyone the same thing right now, we're still going to have people on very different playing fields. Whereas if we address, okay, this person needs this resource, and we individualize it, and we look at it from an equity perspective of like making sure people get what they need based on where they're at, then we're more likely to actually achieve that social change.
Definitely. You know, it's a lot. It's a lot, you know. And to be honest, you know, we both can go deep into this, you know. Um, but the biggest thing is that, you know, acknowledging. I think, you know, acknowledging, you know, what's going on. And just like you said earlier, you know, having more people that's willing to come to the forefront and advocate for this, you know, um, and be a voice. Um, you know, I think of, you know, myself, you know, um, specialty and advocating is, you know, JJ, foster care, in a nutshell, congregate care, you know, and so forth. And I think about, you know, others, you know, and their experiences and what they advocate for. But this is something I don't want to say is new to me, but it is something in the depths of the advocacy and to the experience. It's something that I don't think is highlighted enough or well around, you know. So I commend you for that, and I appreciate the work that you're doing so far, and I hope to see more. I hope to see more. You know, the conversation. It seems to people who haven't been aware that it's just starting, but the conversation has been going for a while now. You know, and it's only more to come.
Yeah, I'm hoping some people will join me, right? If
Mhm.
you're interested in disability advocacy, like there is definitely a gap there. And it would be amazing to get more people at the table talking about their experiences and how we can improve it.
Definitely. Um, Equality shouldn't be something that people have to fight for.
Agreed.
But we live in a society, we live in a world where it's something that you are not born into having. And if you ask for it, it comes off that you think you're entitled. And that is wrong on so many fronts. So many fronts. But I'm a hopeful, positive, optimistic person that believe before I leave this earth, you know, people like you and I are going to make some transformative changes that's going to shake the ground that we stand on and pave a new way for the next generation of advocates that they wouldn't have to endure the ignorance, the bigotry, um, and everything else in between. You know, I do believe that there's a way that we can build these bridges, have these conversations, you know, and make impactful changes around race, around disabilities, around aftercare, after being in child welfare, you know, and so many different segue conversations, you know, in this arena. But more importantly, create changes for people in
Mhm.
general. Um, so yeah.
Yeah, I think it's important, and I really try to drive this home. I think a lot of times when I'm speaking with people who are just starting their advocacy, they're like, "Oh, you're so successful," and like, and I think it's important to really reiterate, like, we started in the same place, right? Like we all started somewhere. And so when you are
Mhm.
talking to someone who you may see as like um a more, I guess, experienced or seasoned advocate, like the reality is like you can be that way too. And like take care of yourself, but like you can make it. Like you can be successful, you can beat those statistics as a former foster youth and really rise above what is expected of us. And like, we're not the numbers that are thrown in our faces, right? We're so much more than that. And our experiences give us almost like an advantage in a way. Like, yes, it's horrible what we went through, and it doesn't erase that it was it might have been a negative experience, but we also have a perspective that a lot of people don't have that we can use to kind of build that expertise in that and that success, right? And success is different for everyone. I know you're often saying that on the podcast. And so just don't compare yourself too much to other people, and understand that you are capable of doing the same things that we do, because we all started there.
Definitely. We all thrive in our own unique way and in our own right, you know. And I get it, you know, chime in after what you just said. I get it, you know, because our child welfare systems have a hand. Our education system has a hand, you know, society has a hand in making you think and making you feel that you got to be just like that next person, or in order to be successful, in order to make it, you have to have a 4-year degree, you have to have a car, you have to have to be debt free, you have to be married to have a kid, you know, all these different things and all this other stuff that at the end of the day does not matter. Are you happy? Are you okay? Are you safe?
Yeah.
You know, there's a couple other ones in there I ain't mentioned, but the meat of it all, are you happy? Are you okay? And are you safe? You know, are you taking care of your self-care? Are you taking care of your mental health? Are you taking care of your physical health? You know, are you taking care of your social life? Like, are you getting out there? Do you have friends? Like, you know, that friend could be a goldfish. And I know I say it all the time on here and people be laughing, but people have real deal relationships with their animals, you know, and that person, that pet can truly be life or death, you know, when you are in that dark depression. So like, you know, and on a more serious note, like, who do you got? Are you happy? You know, and so forth. So you want to, when we talk about thriving, it looks different for everybody, you know, but you are the only person that can determine what that looks like for yourself, you know. As I get ready, you know, as my last couple questions, you know, just going a little bit back, well, not even going back, going forward. What is your now, you know, looking like? You know, what's next?
Yeah, what is next for me? Law school and a PhD at the same time, because I'm a little crazy. I joke about that, but I'm not. I think it's definitely doable. I'm in the middle of application season, and let me tell you, start early. Start early. You're applying for any type of 4-year grad school, whatever it is. Start early. Do yourself that favor. But also, like, I don't think I saw myself here as 17-year-old me would have laughed at you if you told me I was applying for a dual JD PhD. But the goal is to become a civil rights attorney, either focus on LGBTQ and or disability rights, and really try to do the work to make sure that people are having the equity they need, and that we don't have these systems of oppression and marginalization in our country. And obviously, like, that is going to be work I'll probably do till the day I die, and it'll continue after me. But I'm really hoping that I get to use my experience as an advocate and working in policy and legislation to help people outside of foster care, a lot of which overlap with foster care. So looking at how I can use this experience and my privileges that I have to really fight for others.
I love that, you know, and I just thinking as you were mentioning your goals, you know, I'm hoping to one day run for president, you know, so I'm gonna need, you know, you possibly in my cabinet, if you're interested. You, you always have a civil rights attorney in your pocket. You know, just you never know, because I'm gonna be coming in there with a whole afro. I'm picking my hair. I promise you, I'm so serious when it comes to it. If I ever make it that far, it's a big goal of mine to be able to do it, but we never know what life has for me. If I ever make it that far, promise you, my presidential portrait will have a Diane pick with the fist in my hair with the full afro, and that's that's what people are gonna see every time they walk into the White House, But
Can't wait to
uh,
see it.
yeah, yeah, you know, definitely, can't wait to see, all the great work you do in the future.
Thank you.
Um, I'm excited, because I know that you are passionate and it's an authentic passion. It's not something that's fake. It's not a facade, it's not something that you're putting on, to be the best advocate, to all these different, it's something that you truly believe in and you truly want to see the change, and you're stepping in that light to be that change. And then see where it goes. So I'm excited and I appreciate the work that you're doing. So thank you.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me, and I look forward to seeing where you are in the future as well. I think former foster youth, especially advocates, we're the future, right? Young people are the future, and so we have the power, and I think we just need to remind ourselves that we have the power.
I feel like I'm getting old, so I don't know how much longer I can call myself, a young advocate. I don't know, when do we stop saying that?
I totally understand, but I think we're still there, at least for now.
But what advice would you like to leave here today?
Oh, that's a hard one. I think there's so many things I could say, but I think I really want to say, like, we all have that self-doubt and that voice in the back of our head. I think a lot of times we portray success as like not having that, but every single one of us has that. And so my advice is to ignore that voice. If you don't feel like you're qualified, apply anyway. If you don't feel like you're good enough, you are. And just remind yourself that, like, you have been through everything that you've been through and you made it through, and you have been successful, right? 100% of the time, if you look at it. And so ignoring that self-doubt and that what we commonly call imposter syndrome, especially when you've been in foster care and you've been told that you're not going to be successful, that you're not going to be those things. You are. Those people are wrong. Use the no's and the disbelief of other people as that fuel to be like, you know what, I'm going to show you you're wrong, and I'm going to prove you wrong, and I'm going to do this. And that will get you far.
I couldn't have said it better myself. Truly couldn't. Um, any last comments you have for us? And if you got a rap song, album, a book you just dropped or what have you, or any way that people can see some of the work that you're doing, or follow you as you continue to grow and advocate.
Yeah, I think feel free to connect with me on socials. I will give you all of them so you can post them in the notes. And yeah, I love to collaborate with people, so please reach out.
Definitely. It's been an honor, honor and a privilege to have you on, and to take some time out of your life, out of your day, to speak and inform us. I feel informed. I don't know about y'all listening, but I feel more informed. I took some notes about some of this stuff surrounding disability advocacy. And although it's not something that it's completely in my lane, I'm a part of it as well, you know, and I find it to be a part of my duty to continue to take what you've shared with me and share it with others, you know. Um,
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity to do that. And the honor is mine. I really enjoyed our last hour and a half.
Definitely, definitely. Well, as I get ready to close, episode 18 of season 2 of Resilient Voices and Beyond. Excited for what is to come. I'm excited to hear you guys' feedback on this episode. But more importantly, if something during this episode has triggered you, please, please take some time before you do anything next in your day or whatever to center yourself, bring yourself back to baseline, but also take note and, think what specifically triggered you and if it's something worth, more thought or consideration, confer in, some resource or a professional, at your own convenience, but definitely, don't feel alone. I'm here as a resource if you feel led to connect with me. I know April is willing to connect with individuals as well. Especially if it's something surrounding maybe a disability or treatment of a disability, and care. So definitely, take that time. Also, I want to acknowledge that cold flu season, COVID is still going rampant, even more so as we get into these winter months, so please take care of yourself, keep that hand sanitizer on deck, keep a mask on in your car, and so forth, just do what you can to maintain your own health and to take care of, other individuals, in your life in this village we call America, because if one person does the right thing, and others does the right thing, we all are taking care of one another, in this big happy family. Uh, but I want to chime in and say that, as I get ready to end out season 2, I will be taking a break before I do season 3. It's going to be a long break because with 51 episodes in season 1 and however many episodes I finish this out with, that I want people to catch up. I want people to actually listen to the episodes. I want people to think about the conversations that were brought up and uplifted, so when I come back, the conversation can continue more so in depth of creating action behind it. During this time that I'll be, taking breaks between the seasons, I will still be doing work with Resilient Voices and Beyond and creating a movement and an initiative and trying to build my own nonprofit foundation and getting into the groundwork of communities and state agencies and stakeholders and so forth to be able to bridge gaps between those. We talked about disparities today, and that's something that is across the board continuing to hurt, our population. And I want to get to the forefront of those issues. And only way I know I can do that is by outreach and going straight to the source, so I want to take some time to get out there and get from behind this screen and this mic, and talk to some people in person and to see what I can do, whether help raise funds, whether, do create initiatives in schools, whether do trainings, whatever way, speaking, to do that during that time. So that's what that's going to look like after this season end, so if you see me around in your state or in your town, just know that's what I'm doing, and hoping that I can create transformative change. Thank you guys for listening to Resilient Voices and Beyond. I hope you guys have a good night, good morning, good whenever you listen to this. Just let it be good. And I'll talk to you guys soon.